Okay, I'm going to pop some bubbles. This one's going out to a response to One for Israel. One for Israel keeps consistently saying stuff like that the that the Mishnah was written as a response to the New Testament. And I'm going to actually show you how this can be the other way around. And it's very interesting, so hang on. Throughout the New Testament Gospels, there is a phrase that it applies to the sages of Israel. They consistently say, "You snakes, you brood of vipers, you brood of vipers." So actually, specifically in Matthew 23:33, two Greek words for snakes are used. You snakes, you brood of vipers. Now, if we go back to the story of, it's interesting because if you go back to the story of the Exodus from Egypt, Moses at the burning bush, he has a staff, and Hashem shows him, you throw that staff down, there's going to be a sign where it turns into a snake. Okay, whenever Moses uses his staff like that, it says nachash, okay, the word for serpent in Hebrew. And then whenever they're before Pharaoh, Aaron and Moses are before Pharaoh, Aaron throws down his staff, and it says that his staff becomes a tanin, which is some type of like a reptile. Could be like a crocodile, something like that. We typically, see it as some sort of serpent or something like that in the movies and things like that. But basically, anytime it's referring to the staff of Aaron, it's a tanin staff. And when it talks about the staff of Moses, that was the nachash staff. Okay, this is interesting stuff. And it's referring to, this is like two different layers of this is two different layers of the leadership within Israel. So now let's go to the First Temple period. We have the sages of the First Temple period. When their statements get written down in the Mishnah, the sages in the Mishnah are Tanaim. Okay, so we see this word where the person who's transmitting the oral tradition is called a Tana. Okay, and that's the same thing as the Hebrew word for a tan, like a serpent. Okay, so these things are connected. So whenever the New Testament is saying, "You snakes, you brood of vipers," this is a pun, a word pun, because if the vorlage of two Greek words for serpents is used, the vorlage behind that is that there would be some sort of Aramaic Hebrew word for like Tana or Tanaim, right? So whenever it refers to that, it's a slam at the sages from the Mishnah. Okay, so that means that the New Testament now is aware of the Mishnah. So how is this possible? Because we're told that the New Testament manuscripts are from the 1st century, or like the earliest ones are from the 2nd century, and then like the Mishnah was written down about 200 of the Common Era. Wait a second, this gets interesting. So what is the physical evidence of New Testament manuscripts before 200 of the Common Era? So basically, every manuscript is dated by paleography, which means handwriting analysis. Okay, handwriting analysis. All of these are, I'm going to say what they are: P52, Papyrus 52, Papyrus 104, Papyrus 66, Papyrus 75, and Papyrus 46. Those are all of the manuscripts that are paleographically dated to before or right around 200 CE. Okay. Now, they've never been carbon dated. Never been carbon dated. Let me give you an example to this. There was the the Museum of the Bible or something like that, in Washington D.C. Is it the Museum of the Book? The owner of Hobby Lobby made this basically this museum for like biblical stuff, and they tried to acquire 16 Dead Sea Scrolls for their museum. Okay. So they had people do handwriting analysis on these Dead Sea Scrolls to authenticate them. Well, they put them on display, and people were like, there's something a little off with this. People that actually knew some stuff about these ancient documents, and like there's some oddities to these. So the people that handled that Museum of the Book, they had them chemically test these physical manuscripts, and they found out that what had happened was all 16 were forgeries. All 16 of these were forgeries, and someone had taken old, ancient writing material and wrote on top of them to make forged Dead Sea Scrolls. Okay, so what's interesting is there's been little manuscripts, very few manuscripts that have been carbon-14 dated. So basically, that would be dating the material that it's written on, not when the ink gets placed on the material. But whenever it does happen, there's a case for this, and this is really startling. The community roll in the Dead Sea Scrolls. So I would be 4Q, I think it's 258 is the scroll number. That was it's the community roll, where it's like this document that is like all these different things that it almost sounds like it's a manual for like the rules of a monastery. And they say that, people try to say, well, with this community roll, it's basically showing us that there was a proto-Christian group of Jews, and that this is what Christianity spawned from. You know what? They actually carbon-14 tested that manuscript, the community roll. You know what date came back? As early as 325 of the Common Era. And they're like, whoa. We can't, well, there's something wrong with that. We got to have that carbon tested and dated again. They carbon dated it again, and they tried to get it. Somehow they got it close to like the turn of the era, like somewhere around 1 CE, a little before, a little after. Like, so they had that little, that bracketing of when that time period was to kind of cover it, like, oh yeah, this is before, before Jesus or something. So we actually have an instance of this where they paleographically dated it to, like, I think it was like the first or 1 or 2 centuries before the Common Era, and it carbon-14 dated like way in the future, like in the Common Era, which 325, that should ring a bell to people. Council of Nicaea, when Constantine crystallized Christianity and doctrine and sent out the 50 Bibles across the world, and they started planting monasteries all across the Judean desert. Interesting. But anyway, so anytime there was a carbon test on a Christian manuscript, it has always been, it always places the date younger than the paleographic date of that manuscript. Whenever they date Jewish manuscripts paleographically, they tend to date them younger, and when they carbon-14 date them, they find out that they're actually older. Isn't that amazing? And the same thing with Muslim manuscripts. They give conservative dates on the paleography, the writing analysis, and whenever they carbon-14 date them, they find out that they're actually older as well. Christianity, from what I could find, it's 100% the other direction. It's theological bias when they dated the handwriting analysis of all of these documents. So if we take P52, it's paleographically dated at 125, then P104, which is the Matthew fragment, 150, and then P66 is 200, and then P75, 200 to 225, P46, 175 to 225. So now, if we consider that there was a study, like I'm saying, there's Brent Nungri, he's trying to get these New Testament manuscripts to be carbon-14 dated, and there's a lot of complications to this. They tried to do this to the Codex Sinaiticus, and the people who had control of the document, once the crew showed up to do the analysis, they sent them away. They're like, no, it ain't gonna happen. So, but this is the craziness that happens. So basically, if we even push these dates back roughly a half a century or more, you literally get outside of the date of when the Mishnah was written down. Literally, the Mishnah comes before the New Testament, the earliest New Testament evidence at that point. And it's interesting because, okay, so who's dating these manuscripts? Where are these dates that we're coming up with? So they date by paleography, so the handwriting analysis of it. Everything comes from Egypt. All the provenance, all these manuscripts come out of Egypt. They're on papyrus, every single one of them, which means that they're Egyptian. They were never scientifically tested. Okay, so then why are these unreliable? Okay, so Brent Nungri, like I said, in 2005 demonstrated that paleographic range is 100 to 250 CE for P52. So literally it bridges on that real borderline of being around the time of the Mishnah. And then the man who signed the early date, so C.H. Roberts, was proven wrong by 100 plus years on P. Bodmer 24, when carbon dating was finally applied. So Roberts on P. Bodmer 24 dated it to the 2nd century with no hesitation, right? Carbon-14 result was 231 to 339. So wrong by over 100 years. Same man, same method used on P52, okay? Systematic bias. So Roger Bagnall argues Christian papyri are systematically dated 50 years too early. And Orsini and Claircy coined the term theological paleography dating to fit the theology, not the evidence. So the direction of the error, it's always in the same direction for the Christian documents when they actually get a chance to test them. And I mentioned that the Dead Sea Scrolls. Oh, sorry, that was the Museum of the Book. Sorry, the Museum of the Bible, the one that's owned by the Hobby Lobby owners. And then, so if you apply Bagnall's 50-year correction, nothing is confidently before 250 CE for any New Testament manuscript. And if you apply Nongbri's demonstrated 150-year margin, nothing is confidently before 300 of the Common Era. So here's where we get some interesting stuff. So what do we know about church history? Church history literally goes through nearly one man, bottleneck through one man, Eusebius. Okay? Eusebius of Caesarea, he lived at the time of the Council of Nicaea in 325. Okay? He is the single bottleneck for early Christian history. So he sat on Constantine's right hand at Nicaea. He was commissioned to produce 50 official Bibles and wrote the official church history, Jacob Burckhardt called him the first thoroughly dishonest historian of antiquity. Eusebius, he said, was the first thoroughly dishonest historian of antiquity. Unbelievable. Christians don't know their history. Let's go there, okay? The sources known only through Eusebius, all of them are lost. Papias supposedly lived at 130 of the Common Era. First to name Matthew and Mark as gospel authors. They're completely lost. We only know the only person who says that this person says that he knew about Matthew and Mark is Eusebius. All right, writing 200 years later. Okay, and then we have this. How do you pronounce this? Hegesippus. He's lost. Only 8 fragments survive, all via Eusebius. Okay. Quadratus, lost, only known through Eusebius. Julius Africanus, it's mostly lost, most of his stuff is lost, but primarily known through Eusebius. Clement of Alexandria's hypotyposis, so it's lost, only known through Eusebius. So, what remains without Eusebius? We literally have Clement I, who's dated roughly 96 of the Common Era. He quotes Paul, no gospels named. His earliest manuscript of First Clement, Clement I, is the 5th century. All right. So if we even find a look at the earliest evidence of these people that supposedly predated Eusebius, that's outside of Eusebius, he's 5th century. Ignatius, he supposedly lived in the year 110 of the Common Era, roughly around there. He alludes to different things of different gospel writers. Like different, he doesn't actually use the term gospels or anything like that. He says memoirs of the apostles. He doesn't mention Paul or anything else. And he's 10th century. His earliest manuscript that we have is 10th century, 1,000 years after Christianity started, supposedly. Okay, let's go. Polycarp supposedly lived around 130 of the Common Era. He supposedly mentions Paul. We don't really have, it's all late manuscripts of him too. I don't have a date on that. But Justin Martyr, he supposedly lived 150 of the Common Era. He says there's memoirs. I'm sorry, he's the one that talks about the memoirs of the apostles, but he doesn't name Paul. His earliest manuscript, there's one manuscript that dates to 1364 in Paris, okay? Then Ignatius, he supposedly lived about 180 of the Common Era. He's the first to name all 4 Gospels, supposedly. The Greek is mostly lost. We basically have a 10th or 11th century Latin manuscript of Irenaeus. So that's what we have if we take Eusebius out of the picture. You literally have 5 guys that make minor mentions of Christian writings. We'll say apostolic writings. They don't exactly name them significantly. And all of these manuscripts are dated way later. Like I'm saying, 5th century to like beyond like 1300s. Isn't that crazy? Okay, so the bottom line, all pre-400 of the Common Era New Testament manuscripts come from Egypt. Zero exceptions. Zero exceptions. Okay? All on papyrus, with the exception of Codex Sinaiticus and Codex Vaticanus, which are considered to be the 2 of the 50 books of the Bible that were like literally standardized at the Council of Nicaea by Constantine, written by Eusebius. So none have been carbon tested. Every date rests on paleography, a method proven to be wrong 100% of the time when tested. Okay, if we remove Eusebius and nobody names a gospel author before Irenaeus in 180 of the Common Era, remove Eusebius and nobody knows Paul before Marcion, which is 140. Again, we don't even have Marcion, whose works are completely lost. We only find out about him through other writers, right? So then Justin Martyr, writing supposedly in Rome at 150, has zero knowledge that Paul exists. Zero. Okay? The entire first 2 centuries of Christianity are either Eusebius's words or silence. Okay? The physical evidence is Egyptian papyri, paleographically dated and never scientifically tested, and literary witnesses all dependent on manuscripts copied centuries later or channeled through one man at Constantine's court, whose sources are conveniently lost. Isn't that amazing? So, it's actually starting to look like maybe the Mishnah predates the New Testament.